You know this feeling. It's late. You're tired in a way that goes beyond physical tiredness, and your mind is running. Not productively, not working through something useful, not solving a real problem, not moving toward any conclusion that will actually help you tomorrow. Just running. Circling the same material, the same conversations, the same what-ifs and should-haves and what does it means, in a loop that has no natural exit and no apparent off-switch. And the cruelest part isn't the thoughts themselves. It's that you know, consciously, clearly, with complete certainty, that this isn't helping. That thinking about this again for the 15th time tonight is not going to produce a different result than the 14th time did. You know this, and you keep going anyway. If you've been living inside that experience, if the loop is a familiar place, if the mental exhaustion is something you've started to accept as simply part of who you are, I want you to hear something before we go any further. You are not broken. You are not weak. You are not someone who simply worries too much as a fixed feature of your personality that cannot be changed. You are someone whose mind learned through real experience that thinking more was safer than thinking less, that going over things again was better than missing something, that the cost of mental exhaustion was worth paying if it meant being prepared, protected, or at least not caught off guard. That learning made sense when it was formed. It is now running past its usefulness, and understanding precisely why it runs, the specific psychological mechanisms that keep the loop going, is the first step towards something that most overthinkers have stopped believing is genuinely available to them. Peace. Not the absence of thought, not the suppression of a mind that is fundamentally active and curious and alive, but the particular peace of a mind that has learned to think when thinking serves it and rest when rest is what it needs. That is what this is about. 10 stages, 5 reasons why overthinking happens, at the psychological level, beneath the surface, in the mechanisms most people never examine, and 5 specific, practical, genuinely effective techniques for overcoming each pattern. By the end of this, you won't just understand your overthinking differently, you'll have tools, real ones, the kind that work not because they distract you from the loop, but because they address what is actually keeping it running. Let's begin. Reason 1. Your brain is trying to create certainty in an uncertain world. The human brain has one overriding biological priority that shapes almost everything it does. Not happiness, not connection, not meaning or purpose, or any of the things we consciously value most. Safety. The brain's primary job, the function it was designed for before anything else, is threat detection and threat management. And the most sophisticated threat management tool the human brain has developed, particularly in the modern world where most threats are not physical but social and psychological, is anticipatory thinking, running scenarios, preparing for possibilities, identifying what could go wrong before it goes wrong so that the consequences can be managed or avoided entirely. This is brilliant as a survival mechanism. It is genuinely brilliant. And it becomes overthinking when it runs without an off switch, when the threat detection system cannot distinguish between a genuine danger that requires sustained mental preparation and an ambiguous social situation that has already resolved, or a decision that has already been made, or a future scenario that cannot be controlled regardless of how many times it is rehearsed. The brain keeps thinking because thinking feels like doing something. It feels like preparation. It feels like the responsible response to uncertainty. And in an uncertain world, which the modern world absolutely is, the brain finds no shortage of material to apply this mechanism to. The deeper truth is this: most overthinking is the brain's attempt to manufacture certainty in situations where certainty is not available. It keeps running the scenario because it hasn't found the guaranteed outcome it's looking for, and it never will, because guaranteed outcomes don't exist, and the brain, not receiving the certainty it sought, concludes that more thinking is required. The loop is a search for something that cannot be found through searching. Reason 2. You are rewarded for thinking ahead. This one is personal, and it is more common than most people realize. For many chronic overthinkers, the pattern was established and reinforced in early environments where thinking ahead anticipating problems, preparing for difficulties, staying one step ahead of what might go wrong, produced real, tangible benefits. Maybe it meant staying out of trouble in an unpredictable household. Maybe it meant performing well academically by anticipating what teachers wanted. Maybe it meant navigating complex social dynamics by reading situations carefully before acting. Maybe it simply meant that in your environment, the people who thought carefully were safer, more successful, or more valued than the people who didn't. Whatever the specific mechanism, the lesson was learned. Thinking more is better than thinking less. Preparation is protection. Anticipation is wisdom. And the brain, having learned this, generalized it, applied it universally, began running the anticipation program not just in situations that genuinely required careful preparation, but in every situation, including the ones where more thinking produces nothing useful, including the relationships that don't require strategic navigation, including the quiet evenings that should be rest but become rehearsal. The overthinking pattern was not a mistake. It was a learned strategy that worked in the environment where it was developed. It simply hasn't been updated to recognize that not every environment requires it. Reason 3. Your emotions that haven't been processed are looking for an exit. This is the one that surprises people most, because overthinkers typically think of their problem as a thinking problem. Too many thoughts, too much mental activity, a brain that won't quiet down. And they look for solutions in the cognitive domain, ways to interrupt the thoughts, redirect them, manage their content. But a significant portion of what presents as overthinking is not primarily a thinking problem. It is an emotional processing problem that thinking is attempting, unsuccessfully, to solve. When something happens that produces an emotional response that hasn't been fully felt, a disappointment, a loss, a conflict, a fear, the emotional charge of that experience doesn't disappear when the thinking starts. It remains. And the mind, because it has been trained to solve problems through thought, turns its analytical capacity toward the unresolved emotional material and tries to think its way through it. This produces the particular quality of overthinking where the same emotional situation gets reviewed again and again without any sense of resolution. Not because the analysis is insufficient, because analysis is the wrong tool for emotional processing. The emotion needs to be felt, not solved. And until it is felt, until the body is given the experience of moving through the emotional charge rather than around it, the mind will keep returning to the material, convinced that if it just approaches it from the right angle, it will finally find the resolution it's been looking for. The loop is often emotion looking for a door that only feeling can open. Reason 4. Your self-worth is tied to getting things right. This one operates quietly. It doesn't announce itself, but it is one of the most powerful drivers of chronic overthinking, and it runs in the background of almost every loop. When your sense of your own value, your fundamental okayness as a person, is connected even partially to the quality of your decisions and the outcomes they produce, the stakes of every choice become existential. Getting it wrong isn't just an inconvenience or a setback. At some level, it confirms something you're afraid might be true about you, that you're not smart enough, careful enough, good enough, that the mistake says something about who you are rather than simply about what happened. With stakes that high, the mind cannot easily let a decision rest once it's been made. It keeps reviewing it, not because more review will change the outcome, but because the discomfort of having made an imperfect decision and the implicit threat that imperfection carries about your fundamental worth keeps the mind pulling back to the material. This is why perfectionism and overthinking so consistently travel together. The perfectionist is not, at their root, someone who loves excellence for its own sake. They are someone who has learned that excellence is the price of acceptance, that getting things right is the mechanism by which they secure their own value in the world, and that getting things wrong carries consequences that go beyond the practical into the deeply personal. The overthinking is not about the decision, it is about what the decision might say about the person making it. Reason 5. Your nervous system never learned to return to rest. This is physiological as much as psychological, and understanding it changes how you relate to the experience of not being able to stop thinking. The nervous system has two primary modes of operation. The activated mode, the stress response, the fight or flight system, which is designed to mobilize the body's resources in response to threat, and the rest and digest mode, the parasympathetic system, which is designed to bring the body back to baseline after the threat has passed. In a well-regulated nervous system, these two modes cycle naturally. Activation when activation is needed, recovery when it is not. The body knows how to come back down. In a nervous system that has been chronically stressed, that has had sustained, unrelenting activation without sufficient recovery, the return to rest becomes more difficult. The baseline shifts upward, the system stays primed, and the mind, which takes its cues about whether the world is safe from the state of the nervous system, stays in scanning mode, stays watchful, stays thinking, because a nervous system that is activated communicates to the brain that there is something to be vigilant about, even when the specific threat has long since passed. Chronic overthinking is often not a thinking problem at all at this level. It is an activated nervous system that has forgotten the felt experience of genuine rest, keeping the mind in a state of continuous low-level alert because that is the state it has come to recognize as normal. The mind is not the problem. The nervous system is the problem, and the solution lives there too. Technique 1. Trade certainty seeking for uncertainty tolerance. Since the root of so much overthinking is the mind's attempt to manufacture certainty that doesn't exist, the most direct intervention is not to think better about the uncertain situation. It is to build a genuine, practiced tolerance for the experience of not knowing. This is a capacity, not a personality trait, not something you either have or don't have, but a skill that develops through deliberate, repeated practice of a single thing, choosing not to resolve ambiguity prematurely. In practice, this looks like catching the moment when you're about to run the loop again, about to return to the unanswerable question, the unmakeable decision, the scenario you've already reviewed 14 times, and making a different choice. Not suppression, not distraction, a deliberate, conscious acknowledgement. I don't know how this will turn out. I am choosing to live inside that not knowing without requiring resolution right now. Then, and this is the part most people skip, notice that you survived the not knowing, that the moment passed without the catastrophe the anxiety was anticipating. That uncertainty, while uncomfortable, did not produce the outcome your nervous system was treating as inevitable. Each time you do this, you are accumulating evidence that uncertainty is livable, that the discomfort of not knowing is temporary and manageable, evidence that contradicts the brain's working assumption that more thinking will eventually produce the certainty it's looking for. Over time, not immediately, but genuinely over time, the tolerance builds. The pull toward the loop weakens, not because the uncertain situations have resolved, but because you have stopped requiring them to. Technique 2. Update the learning that thinking more is always better. Because the overthinking pattern was established through learning, through the experience of thinking ahead producing real benefits, it can be updated through new learning, through the accumulated experience of discovering that thinking less in specific situations produces better outcomes than thinking more. The practical version of this is what some psychologists call a thinking time container, a deliberate, bounded period, 15 or 20 minutes, at a specific time you choose, in which you allow yourself to think as thoroughly as you want about whatever is looping, and then, when the container closes, you practice redirecting your attention to something present and specific, a physical sensation, a task, a conversation, for the rest of the day. What this does is teach the brain something it urgently needs to learn, that there is a difference between productive thinking and compulsive repetition, that the thinking which happens in the deliberate container is the useful kind, organized, boundaried, directed towards actual decisions and real problems, and that the thinking which happens outside the container at 2 in the morning for the 15th consecutive hour is not producing anything the earlier thinking didn't already produce. You are not suppressing the thinking, you are training it, giving it a time and a place and a purpose, and gently but firmly withdrawing permission for it to operate outside those boundaries. The brain learns what it practices. Practice bounded thinking, and bounded thinking becomes the new default. It takes weeks rather than days, but it works in a way that willpower alone never does, because it changes the pattern rather than just interrupting it. Technique 3. Feel what the thinking is trying to solve. Because a significant portion of overthinking loops are emotions seeking expression rather than problems seeking solution, one of the most powerful interventions available is learning to ask a different question when the loop begins. Not "what does this mean?" or "what should I do?" or "what if this goes wrong?" the questions the analytical mind reaches for automatically. But what am I feeling right now, in my body, about this situation? And then, this is the part that requires the most courage and produces the most relief. Actually feeling it, not analyzing it, not immediately reaching for an explanation of why you feel it or a strategy for what to do about it. Just locating it in the body, letting it be present, breathing into it, and allowing it to move through the natural arc that unfelt emotions are always waiting to complete. This practice, sometimes called somatic processing, sometimes called emotional completion, does something that no amount of analytical thinking can accomplish. It closes the loop. Not by solving the problem the emotion was attached to, but by completing the biological cycle that the emotion needed to complete. The charge discharges. The nervous system releases something it was holding, and the mind, which was using the loop as a proxy for emotional processing, finds that the pull toward the material has significantly lessened. What you will discover if you practice this consistently is that many of the thoughts you've been trying to think your way through were never thoughts at all. They were feelings. And they were waiting, patiently and persistently, for someone to stop analyzing them long enough to simply feel them. Technique 4. Separate your worth from your outcomes. This is the deepest and most transformative work available to the chronic overthinker whose pattern is driven by the connection between decisions and self-worth. And it is work that cannot be done quickly or by force. It develops through the slow, consistent, patient accumulation of a different experience. The different experience is this: making imperfect decisions and discovering that you are still fundamentally okay. Getting something wrong and finding that the wrongness says nothing true about your fundamental value as a person. Failing at something and remaining, in the most essential sense, intact. The practical entry point into this work is something small and deliberate. Choose regularly and repeatedly to do something where the outcome is uncertain and your performance is genuinely imperfect, and practice bringing compassionate, honest attention to the experience of having been imperfect without letting the imperfection become a statement about your worth. This is not the same as not caring about quality. Caring about quality and connecting your worth to outcomes are different things. One is healthy investment in what you do. The other is the attachment of your fundamental value as a human being to results that are never fully within your control. The overthinker who has made this distinction, who has genuinely, experientially separated who they are from how they perform, finds that the review loops lose most of their urgency, because the stakes have changed. A decision that was imperfect is simply a decision that was imperfect. It is information. It is experience. It is the ordinary material of a life being lived by a human being who, like all human beings, is doing their best with what they have. It is not a verdict. Technique 5. Regulate the nervous system first, then address the thoughts. This is the most immediately practical technique in this entire script, and it is the one that makes everything else more accessible. Because if the overthinking is being driven at the physiological level by a nervous system that has lost its ability to return to genuine rest, then all the cognitive interventions in the world will only partially work. You cannot think your way out of a dysregulated nervous system. The nervous system needs to be addressed directly in the language it actually understands, which is not language at all. It is sensation, movement, breath, physical input that communicates directly to the autonomic nervous system that it is safe to come down from activation. The most accessible entry point is the breath, specifically extended exhale breathing, where the exhale is deliberately longer than the inhale. 6 counts in, 8 counts out. This breathing pattern directly stimulates the vagus nerve, which activates the parasympathetic system, the rest and digest response, and begins to lower the baseline activation level that is keeping the mind in scanning mode. Do this for 5 minutes before attempting any other technique. Not because 5 minutes of breathing solves everything, but because 5 minutes of extended exhale breathing genuinely, measurably changes the physiological state you are in. And the physiological state you are in determines how accessible every other technique is. A regulated nervous system can use cognitive tools. A dysregulated nervous system cannot, not effectively, not sustainably. Beyond breath, any rhythmic physical movement, walking, particularly in natural environments where the bilateral stimulation of left-right movement provides additional nervous system regulation, serves this function. The body moving at a steady, sustainable pace communicates safety to the nervous system in a way that sitting still with racing thoughts never does. Regulate the body, then address the mind. In that order. Always in that order. The mind is not the starting point. The body is. And when you begin there, when you meet the overthinking at the level where it is actually being generated rather than at the level where it is being expressed, something becomes possible that all the cognitive effort in the world could not produce. Genuine quiet. Not the absence of thought, the presence of rest. You came into this believing, maybe, that you are simply someone who overthinks. That the loop is a permanent feature of who you are rather than a pattern you developed and a pattern you can change. I hope what you're leaving with is something more useful than that. 5 reasons, 5 techniques, each one specific, each one grounded in the actual psychology of what is happening rather than the surface experience of it. The brain seeking certainty in an uncertain world and learning to tolerate uncertainty instead. The early learning that thinking more is always better and updating that learning through bounded, deliberate practice. The emotion that has been trying to exit through the door of thought and finally being given the door it actually needs. The worth that has been attached to outcomes and being gently, persistently separated from them. The nervous system that has forgotten how to rest and being taught through breath and movement and deliberate regulation that rest is safe. None of this is instant. None of it is a switch you flip. It is practice. Patient, consistent, compassionate practice. The kind that changes not just what you do, but what you are able to feel. And what you will feel as the practice accumulates is something the overthinking mind has been circling for a very long time without being able to reach. Not certainty, not the guaranteed outcomes the loop was searching for. Something better than certainty. The quiet confidence of a person who trusts themselves to handle whatever comes, who doesn't need to rehearse every possibility because they know from experience that they are capable of meeting what actually arrives, who can sit with not knowing and find that the not knowing, while real, is not the threat it once felt like. That person is not someone you have to become from scratch. They are already there, underneath the loop, waiting for the loop to finally, gradually, permanently quiet enough to be heard. If this gave you something real today, if something in it landed in a way that felt like genuine understanding rather than just information, share it with someone who needs it. Someone in the loop right now who doesn't yet know there is a way through. Like it if it reached you. Subscribe because there is more here, and it will find you when you're ready. Your mind was never your enemy. It was just waiting for someone to understand it well enough to help it rest.